The Committee on Oversight and Government Reform will be called back into session. I appreciate all of your flexibility with regards to the vote on the House floor. I know other members are headed back this way. So I'm going to go ahead and recognize the gentleman from Wisconsin, Mr. Grothman, for 5 minutes.
Oh, okay, I was going to ask Mr. Cochran some questions, but we're going to have to put Ms. Wagner on the spot. I assume, you know, from your biography, you've represented a lot of people, maybe primarily but not exclusively of the Christian faith. Want to in general give, you may be familiar, I don't know what your personal religious background is, but you could in general just give us a Christian perspective or the belief of, say, many mainline Christian churches, be it Baptist, Assembly of God, Wells Lutheran, on this issue.
Well, I can't speak to all faiths, but I can tell you that I know in terms of the Abrahamic religious tradition that marriage is between a man and a woman. The Holy Scriptures contain many different provisions that essentially say that, and that God created man and woman to partner together and in sexual complementarity to create human beings in His image. And so the purpose of marriage in religion is to perpetuate the human race and to honor the dignity and equality of all human beings and create families that will be in the image of God and promote human flourishing in that.
Okay, I don't know, do you have children?
I do.
Good, congratulations.
My daughter's here today.
Good. Your mom's doing a good job. Do you then want, would you hope your children you're raising your children hoping they'll have the same beliefs that you do? Is that part of the Christian faith that you want to raise your children to also share in that faith, share in those beliefs?
It would very much be my hope and my priority that my children choose to walk in the faith that we have chosen and that we're a part of. At the same time, though, what I so much appreciate about the Christian faith is that it's a matter of free will, and they have that choice and need to make that decision on their own.
Okay. I'll give you a general question, because they want me to give you a general question. Could you give us an oversight of what this bill does and why it's important to you?
Well, the bill is important because what we're seeing at the state level and also beginning to see at the federal level is that those who have the politically unpopular view now that marriage is between a man and a woman are being silenced, banished, and punished, including threatened with jail time potentially, threatened with crippling fines, and forced to go out of their business and not earn a livelihood simply because they will not promote a message about same-sex marriage that violates their religious convictions, or they won't actually participate in a same-sex ceremony. There is no case in this nation that we're aware of where anyone has been denied services simply because someone expressed a sexual preference. And instead, what we have seen is truly the bullying and the penalization of those who just seek to live peacefully and work peacefully consistent with their beliefs.
Okay. Just going through some of the papers we got to prepare today, apparently one issue out there is their adoption agencies. And apparently some adoption agencies don't like to place children with same-sex couples. If you were ever in a position to put a child up for adoption, would you prefer that your child not be placed with a same-sex couple?
Well, I don't know that my personal beliefs would be particularly
Well, okay, I'll put it this way. Would a whole lot of people with mainstream Christian beliefs not want their child placed with a same-sex couple?
I don't know what a whole lot of people would do, but I know that in a diverse and tolerant society, they should be able to have that choice. And that's what's so great about the American system. It's also important to know that there are a number of religiously based adoption agencies and foster care agencies that it's not simply that they don't want to, it's that they don't believe it's in the child's best interest, because children do best with mothers and fathers. They have the right to know and be loved by their mothers and their fathers.
Are we in danger of this country without a bill similar to this, of creating a situation which if you want to put your child up for adoption, you will not be able to assure that your child, if you go through a mainstream adoption agency, you'll not be able to assure that your child will be raised by a mother and father?
Well, we don't even have to speak in future tense because that's already happened. We can look in D.C. and Illinois and in other states where Catholic Charities and other religiously based adoption agencies has been forced to close their doors. They've lost their licenses simply because they are a religious organization that wants to operate consistent with their religious beliefs on marriage.
Okay. I don't believe we can have the government establish a religion, but isn't it true, you're a lawyer, that our forefathers anticipated America be a country in which you would be free to practice your Christian belief and free to raise your children in that belief?
Absolutely, and we know that throughout our history in America, our founding fathers, as well as those in Congress and others, have successfully provided religious accommodations, balanced religious liberty interests against other important state interests, interests that include national security and education and healthcare. We can do this, and there's no reason that we shouldn't here.
Are we headed in this country towards a place in which the federal government and state governments are hostile to parents who want to raise their children in a Christian faith?
The gentleman's time has expired, but you can answer the question.
There's no question that there is government hostility to those who believe that marriage is between a man and a woman. There's no question that they're being silenced, that they're being banished from the marketplace simply because of their views.
I thank the gentleman. I thank you. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Oklahoma, Mr. Russell, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, panel, for being here today and for your testimonies. I'm not certain whether FADA is the best means for protecting what is constitutionally guaranteed or not. I think it needs more deliberation. But one thing I am certain of, Mr. Chairman, is that in our current day, the greatest assault on the free exercise of religion is being perpetuated by those most responsible to protect it, those who uphold the law. Instead of upholding the free exercise clause of the First Amendment, we have now seen this body continue its assault on faith in America. It is not enough to level accusations of injustice. Many will not be satisfied until their assaults of intolerance on people of faith in this country has produced an elimination of God in public life in America. We are accused of hatred, called out as shameful, and enjoined to use the whole Constitution to support an opposing view that embodies behavior, mores, and outcomes that not only violate our conscience, but have been prohibited under the laws of nature and nature's God. In the last 50 years, we have seen the Constitution used by ideologues to kill American children in the womb, eliminate family structure, elevate behavior over belief, redefine marriage, and assault into silence and inaction any who oppose them. Not satisfied, we now see them without rest on their quest to eliminate free exercise of faith in the United States. Do we really want a nation without God? They would call it progress, yet our conscience knows different. The Apostle Paul explained why when he said, and I am exercising my First Amendment right to state this, "For the wrath of God is revealed from heaven against all ungodliness and unrighteousness of men, who suppress the truth in unrighteousness, because what may be made known of God is manifest in them. For God has shown it to them. For since the creation of the world, his invisible attributes are clearly seen, being understood by the things that are made, even his eternal power and Godhead, so that they are without excuse. Because although they knew God, they did not glorify him as God, nor were thankful, but became futile in their thoughts, and their foolish hearts were darkened. Professing themselves to be wise, they became fools. Therefore, God also gave them up to uncleanness in the lust of their hearts, to dishonor their bodies among themselves, who exchanged the truth of God for the lie, and worshiped and served the creature rather than the Creator." The Creator. Our nation has always been anchored in the Creator from its inception. Throughout its history, God has been the foundation of our republic as seen in the sweeping lines in the Declaration of Independence. None of the founders of this country believed that a governmental connection to religion was an evil in itself. They opposed the establishment of a national religion because it could prohibit free exercise of faith, but that faith would and should be freely exercised. The same day the Bill of Rights was introduced, July 13, 1787, this Congress also introduced the Northwest Ordinance to lay guidelines and instruction on new territory acquired by a future United States. Article 3 of that ordinance stated, and I quote, "Religion, morality, and knowledge being necessary to good government and happiness of mankind, schools and the means of education shall be forever encouraged." Forever be encouraged, Mr. Chairman. Some in this body today would believe forever stops in 2016 and should have stopped much sooner. They claim that Congress grants these unalienable rights and use the powers of government without the consent of the governed to regulate and diminish faith and eliminate it from public life. In 1798, in response to the claim that Congress could regulate the First Amendment freedoms without abridging them, James Madison condemned it, saying, and I quote, "The liberty of conscience and the freedom of the press were completely exempted from all congressional authority whatever," end quote. Mr. Speaker, forever be encouraged. Is that where we stand today? Shall religious freedom, the hallmark of Columbia's shores, continue to be forever encouraged? Or do we who are so humbly honored to serve in these chambers now step aside as we see the indispensable supports of our religion and morality knocked from under our foundation? Mr. Chairman, I can't be silent. Since I was 18, I have pledged and defended the Constitution of the United States of this great republic. I've been moved by conscience and dictates to speak out against the coercion of people of faith who are being discriminated against because they hold to the laws of nature and nature's God. Our institutions, once based on the creator of life, have now appointed themselves to usurp the authority of God, who is the author of life, marriage, and family. The most elemental sovereign unit, the family, has been destroyed by our foolish decisions. We are told instead by those of us sworn to uphold the law that murder is not murder, marriage is not marriage, family is not family. We have allowed constitutional constructs to kill a child and call it a choice. We have seen discrete behaviors and private sexual preferences now promoted to public display, while what is constitutionally guaranteed to be able to express religion is now publicly prohibited. This nation, at its highest level, it seems, has taken a position against God. And so I close with this, Mr. Speaker, Mr. Chairman. Is it possible to form a more perfect union without God? Can we establish justice absent the giver of law? Can domestic tranquility be ensured when we abandon his precepts? Can we provide for a common defense absent a mighty fortress and an unfailing bulwark? How do we promote the general welfare when every American is now seemingly unanchored, adrift to do what seems right in his own eyes? Do we suppose we can secure the blessings of liberty without him? Can we acknowledge our prosperity and expect to obtain his blessing without acknowledging his existence? And so, Mr. Speaker, like our forebears, I will not be silent while it is still legal to not be. My faith directs that I act with love and civility and gentlemanly manner. My optimism is secured by eternal hope and everlasting truth. My conscience speaks to God's eternal being so that I am without excuse. But his love and mercy cannot be separated from those who answer his call. Mr. Chairman, I yield back my time.
The gentleman's time has expired. The chair recognizes himself for a series of questions. And Dr. Frank, let me come to you. Specifically, a lot has been said here today about penalties and what may happen and what may not happen. So as it relates to this particular piece of legislation, can you speak to the penalty clause and what it is and what it is not?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I regret that more Democratic members haven't rejoined us because I think that some of them were misreading the text of the bill. I'm willing to forgive them for that error in light of the fact that the Columbia law professor to my right seems also to be misreading the bill and perhaps misleading the members. The word penalty appears one time in FADA as now written, as proposed by Congressman Labrador, and that's in Section 3 on page 3, line 18. In context, that refers only to tax penalties under the Internal Revenue Code. So let me go back to the top. The notwithstanding clause, notwithstanding any other provision of law, what? The federal government shall not take any discriminatory action against a person. Then discriminatory action is defined several lines later. The very first definition of discriminatory action is a reference to unfavorable tax treatment because of one's religious or moral convictions about marriage.
So what you're saying
It's the only place
is
where
that if
penalty
they violate it, the IRS cannot come in and say, you owe a penalty, and they cannot charge a penalty as punishment. Is that correct?
Unfavorable tax treatment alone. And what this means is that all the worries I've been hearing today about FADA undoing civil rights protection, the Family and Medical Leave Act, the Fair Housing Act, Title VII, Title IX, it's all misplaced.
So what you're saying is
and it-
the
and-
text of that bill would not support any undoing of the Fair Housing Act or the Civil Rights Act or anything like that. Ms. Wagner, would you agree with that?
Absolutely.
So if that's the case, and that's obviously something of great debate, if you believed, Ms. Wagner, that this particular bill would undo the Civil Rights Act or the Fair Housing Act, would you oppose this bill?
I would need to look at what the bill actually does, but
Well,
what I can say,
let's put it in context. Let me just tell you from my standpoint, if this bill undermines those foundational things that have served us to protect civil rights, I will oppose this bill.
I would agree with you very
Okay,
much
and
so.
so I guess what I'm here to say is Dr. Frank, if you're saying that this penalty would not actually be a penalty to say that we can discriminate, is that what you're saying? I don't want to put words in
that
your
is-
mouth.
No, that is what I'm saying. If the federal government is obliged under Civil Rights, Family and Medical Leave Act, Fair Housing Act, to assess a penalty against persons engaging in unlawful discrimination, FADA does not let those people off the hook. It simply doesn't.
So those penalties would stay in place under existing law, and this bill does not do anything to undermine that. Is that your sworn testimony?
Yes.
Okay. Ms. Wagner, would you agree with that?
Yes, I would.
Okay. Ms. Frankie, I've found that your testimony was very engaging, and I shared that with you personally, and here's where I would like to work with you, knowing that we probably came from two different ideological perspectives on this particular issue. However, maybe at the core of that foundation is both of us in the belief that discrimination is something that is abhorrent and something that should not be tolerated. Would you agree that discrimination is something that is abhorrent and shouldn't be tolerated?
I think I can agree with that.
I thought you might. And so in doing that, here's what I would like for all of us to do. Is let's look at the text of this bill, and Ms. Frankie, you have said that your Columbia Law students would have gotten an F if they had drafted it this way, so we will tell Ledge Counsel that they just got an F at Columbia Law School.
There's a procedure, though, for reopening a grade.
Okay, well, let's look at the procedure for reopening a grade, because here's what I would like to do, is we have had very robust conversations that disagree. Now, what my concern is that we are at times missing each other based on misinformation on what the bill is, on what the bill might do, and on what the bill does do. And so I think it's important for us to really start to narrowly focus and start to say the narrowly focused portions of this, what does it protect and what does it not protect? Because I've heard a number of my colleagues on both sides of this particular seat suggest things that may not be entirely accurate from the context of what is there. I think we can all agree, Chief Cochran, that the kind of discrimination that you had to face is not only wrong, but it goes against our constitutional founding principles. And even Mr. Frank, who may not agree with you on some of your particular positions, agrees that the way that you were treated was incorrect. Isn't that correct, Mr. Frank?
It is, and I wish we had a bill to protect them.
Well, in doing that, we can certainly look at a bill, but what we have is something far greater than a bill. We have the Constitution. And the Constitution, the same Constitution that Ms. Frankie will teach her law students to make sure that she upholds, is there to do it. Now, here's the interesting thing is, when jurisprudence starts to come in and starts to look at our founding principles from a constitutional standpoint, then it is important for us to act. Then it is important for us to clarify. Then it is important for the legislative body to say, this is what we will tolerate, this is what we believe is appropriate. And indeed, that, I can tell you, in talking to my good friends, Senator Lee and Raul Labrador, that is their intent, is not to discriminate. In fact, if anything, it is to stop discrimination. And that needs to be the underlying principle here today in all of the argument that goes back and forth. So, Ms. Wagner, do I have your commitment that you're willing to work with this committee and indeed members of this committee, perhaps individually, to help us look at the language and make sure that it does not indirectly or directly violate the Fair Housing Act or the Civil Rights Act or anything like that? Will you be willing to do that?
We would very much appreciate that opportunity.
Well, you have a standing invitation, and my schedule is open to you. Ms. Frankie, do I have your commitment to do the same with me as we would sit down without any cameras, without any reporters, to try to work through this to make sure that those protections are there?
Absolutely.
Thank you, Ms. Frank. Dr. Frank, do I have your same assurances where you can look at this and say, here's how we're going to work together to make sure that all rights are protected? Will you be willing to work with us?
Absolutely.
Well, I thank each of you. The gentleman from Georgia has come in, and so the chair recognizes the gentleman from Georgia, Mr. Carter, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank all of you for being here. Mr. Cochran, Chief Cochran, thank you especially. As a fellow Georgian, I have followed your case since its beginning, and it has saddened me. I will tell you that. It saddened me to hear that your 34-year career, during which you were nationally recognized as Fire Chief of the Year, came to an abrupt end at the hands of the city of Atlanta, all because you expressed your religious beliefs. After you were suspended, but before you were terminated, the city of Atlanta determined that you had not discriminated against anyone for any reason. None of the witnesses interviewed by the city could point to a single instance in which any member of any organization was treated unfairly by you. Is that correct?
That's correct, sir.
Yet, because the city of Atlanta, the mayor of Atlanta, and city council had already publicly disagreed with your religious beliefs before the investigation, you were terminated despite no evidence that you discriminated against anyone. Is that correct?
That's correct, sir.
Do you believe that if you had published your book while you were employed at the federal level as a fire administrator for the U.S. Fire Administration, that you would have been fired from that position for your beliefs?
It's hard to say at that time whether or not I would have, but I believe based upon the tremendous radical shift of the atmosphere in the United States of America on this issue of marriage and sexuality, were I the U.S. Fire Administrator in these times, I would certainly be terminated from employment. It is my desire to see legislation at the federal, state, and local level that would protect any American, in spite of or regardless of their belief about marriage and sexuality, be protected from adverse consequences for actually expressing that or living it out in their personal lives.
So, Chief Cochran, you believe that the First Amendment Defense Act will protect federal employees from the suffering the same punishment that you suffered, you, the National Fire Chief of the Year, suffered?
Yes, sir, I believe that it will, and I think it will also provide a provision whereby people who share different beliefs from the government on marriage and sexuality will not be withheld from employment from the federal government as well.
Mr. Chairman, opponents of this First Amendment Defense Act would have us believe that this is a solution in search of a problem and that this doesn't happen at the federal level. But here we have an example. Here we have an example of an award-winning public servant who served both at the state and the federal level, who was fired without evidence of any wrongdoing other than elected officials didn't like his religious beliefs. That's it. Simply, they did not like his religious beliefs. No other reason whatsoever. No indication, no proof of any kind of discrimination by anyone at any level. You know, if someone can get fired by one of the largest cities in the country for freely expressing their religion, which is a constitutionally protected right, then it's only a matter of time before this happens at the federal level. And it's my belief that this is the reason why we need this legislation, to protect anyone who expresses their beliefs. Chief Cochran, do you agree with that?
I absolutely agree with you, sir.
Chief, as I said, I have followed your case closely. 2 years ago at this time, I was in the state Senate of Georgia, and I followed it very closely. In fact, you may not know, but we both share condo at the same condo complex in Atlanta. And you're a neighbor of mine, and I'm proud to call you a neighbor. And I'm proud because you're a fine American. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Chair recognizes himself for 5 minutes. Thank you again for all the panel being here today. We appreciate your time. I did have a couple questions that I wanted to come through just in case we have, yes, about 4 or 5 minutes left. Let me start with Ms. Wagner. One of the questions that I'd like to hear from you, if possible, if you have time to answer, if the government was to force faith communities to violate their freedom to believe or to discontinue community services, what would our local communities lose?
They would lose all kinds of humanitarian and good works. In many instances, we have a number of religiously oriented foster care and adoption agencies. We have Catholic hospitals. We have Islamic hunger programs. We have Jewish food banks. Much of the humanitarian work that is done in the United States is done by those who are motivated by faith. And there's a mistaken notion that they would choose to forego their religious beliefs to stay open. We've seen that in other cases as well.
I would certainly concur. I've had the opportunity over the years of serving in the inner cities of places like Cleveland, and New York, and Baltimore, and there is no match for what faith-based organizations can do, specifically in some of these tough-to-reach places. These are the people that hold the hands of the sickest, that reach out. I'm reminded, in Moore, Oklahoma, you may have remembered the tornadoes that viciously swept through there. I was compelled to remember the newscast. CBS and NBC did a joint newscast where Harry Simon and Brian Williams both, and I remember the quote by Harry Smith, it says, "As you and I have seen in so many different places in this country, if you're waiting for the government, you're going to be in for an awful long wait." However, he said this, "The Baptist men, they're going to get it done tomorrow." And I think about that as an over context to make sure that as we look at legislation, that we're protecting those who are working behind the scenes in places where their names aren't recognized, or in headlines, or in the press, but they're doing the work because they are driven by their faith to do so. Chief Cochran, you make us proud. You have survived discrimination both in the civil rights arena as well as in the political correctness arena. The comments that we've heard today about checking your beliefs at the door, you have stood up. And to use a passage that you might be familiar with, that I reminded of it, I believe it was Paul that wrote, "Alexander the coppersmith did me much harm, but for what they meant for harm, God meant for good." And I think your life is a story because you have kept your faith, and you have kept the right spirit, and now I believe that you are being celebrated because of that. My question to Representative Frank would be this. Do you condone the harassment made by the City of Atlanta against Chief Cochran?
Well, I know you've had it in and out, but I've said several times that I don't.
Okay.
I did also note that this bill, of course, would do nothing to prevent that. And the bill, if I could use lawyers' terms, it's over-inclusive and under-inclusive. It protects only one set of statements, a particular religious belief about a particular issue. I think the bill ought to be to give protection to any statement of any political or religious belief as long as it's not job relevant. In his case, it wasn't job relevant. If it was for the Justice Department Civil Rights Division, it would be. So I think a law that protects any statement of religious or political belief that's irrelevant to the job duties should be passed.
How about for elected office?
Oh, I do not believe that we interfere with what the voters can do. I'm against any, as far as elected office. In fact, there was a case, you will remember, when a member of this body from South Carolina shouted something out at the president, and the House, unwisely in my judgment, voted to criticize him. I refuse to vote on that. I think the relationship between an elected official and his or her constituents is paramount, and nobody else should intrude into that.
That was before I arrived, but I do remember that making news. My question, follow-up question, Mr. Frank, is that I know that there's been some comments that you've made in the past, former President Mitt Romney, about his particular views on traditional marriage, and I think you have found them offensive. Is that to a place there that you would say that these people who hold religious belief in traditional marriage should not be protected?
Of course not. As a matter of fact, again, you're out. When a preacher from Kansas, from Westboro, went and started harassing or picketing funerals of servicemen because he said God was punishing America because it was too pro-gay, and this House voted 400-3 to legally prohibit him from doing so, even when he wasn't intruding on the grounds. I was one of the 3. And the Supreme Court said we were right. No, I am in favor of any opinion anywhere. I am not in favor of having money go to someone, and by the way, this does not protect the fair housing law, notwithstanding any other provision of law. I am not for being taxed so people can build housing from which people like me are excluded.
Maybe some debate on that, and I want to conclude with my final question here to Dr. Frank, if I could please. Will FADA authorize employees of the federal government to refuse to provide services to same-sex couples and or eliminate any anti-discrimination protections for LGBT employees of such contractors?
No, not on any fair reading of the of FADA that I can see. And if I may, former Congressman Frank has now twice referred to persons working in the Civil Rights Division of the Justice Department. Earlier, he also referred to persons working in the EEOC. And if I understood him correctly, he regarded people's opinions on marriage there as so fundamentally job-related that he would let them go, even if they did not act on those beliefs in their official capacity in their job performance. So again, perhaps he would like to clarify or qualify what he said, and I invite him to do so, but it sounded like, because I'm sure there are persons who believe in conjugal marriage between one man and one woman working today in the Civil Rights Division and the EEOC, and it sounded like he'd like them to lose their job.
May I respond?
Just 30 seconds.
Yeah, just as I would say if you say you believe in racial discrimination or religious discrimination, anytime you are at an agency that's in charge of protecting and enforcing constitutional rights, and you express your view that that constitutional right should not exist,
Mr.
and
Frank,
it's damaging to the country,
Chair.
then you should not be in the enforcement position there.
Thank you, Representative Frank. Well, let me say thank you to all of our witnesses for their appearance here today. It's been a little bit of a long hearing, but you have been patient, and we appreciate your testimony. If there is no other further business, without objection, the committee stands adjourned.
Okay.